Breaking tonight. Democratic breakdowns almost never begin with gunfire or explosions. They begin with a moment so small, so ordinary, that most people miss it. But on a cold London night, Britain didn't miss it because the moment was deafening. A single riot shield hit the pavement in Parliament Square, not dropped by accident, but abandoned. And the metallic thud rolled across the capital like a national alarm bell. That was the second the country realised something was wrong. Not with the crowd, not with the police, but with the system itself. Seconds later, a second shield fell, then a third, then an entire line of them. It wasn't chaos yet. It wasn't revolt yet. It was something worse, the first sign of a democratic malfunction, a split in the trust between the governed and the governing, a gap widening too fast to close. But the story didn't begin in the streets. It began inside Downing Street, inside a secured operations room where Prime Minister Keir Starmer stared at a live drone feed showing nearly 3,000 protesters flooding Whitehall. On the opposite side of the screen stood the hardened police line, helmets down, shields locked, the kind of formation that usually ends a confrontation before it begins. Starmer leaned forward, gave the order every PM hopes they never have to give. Advance, clear the area, use necessary force. The command moved instantly through the radios. Boots hit the pavement, shields came up, a wall of state authority started marching forward, a tactic that always worked, always, but not this time. The crowd didn't retreat, they didn't scatter, they hardened. Thousands of voices fused into one roar so powerful it drowned out the officers' commands. We're not leaving. That was the moment the usual sequence, push, pressure, disperse, broke, and then the fuse was lit. A flare shot through the night sky, red light spilling over rooftops, helmets and windows. It hit the ground with a burst that shook the entire police line. Horses panicked, shields cracked, officers stumbled, and the crowd surged like a wave that had been waiting for the signal to rise. Barriers ripped from their bases, fences became weapons. 2 police vans went up in flames by the cenotaph, and within minutes, Whitehall transformed from a protest zone into something far more dangerous, a place where the state no longer controlled the street. But the real collapse wasn't happening on the ground, it was happening online, and the government was already losing the digital war. The moment the first riot shield hit the ground wasn't just a noise, it was a signal. And by the next hour, that signal had turned into a nationwide fracture the government could no longer pretend to control. Because while Downing Street prepared for a simple dispersal operation, the streets outside were evolving into something far more volatile, something no briefing paper, no tactical plan, no political strategy had prepared them for. Inside the operations suite beneath Number 10, Keir Starmer gave the order with the kind of confidence you only have when you think authority is enough to shape reality. Advance, clear the area, use necessary force. The message pulsed through the comm lines like electricity. Police formations tightened, boots locked into rhythm. The doctrine was simple: push, pressure, disperse. The old choreography that always worked. But the crowd didn't move. What stared back at the police wasn't fear, it was resolve. 3,000 voices rising in a single unified chant, powerful enough to shake the very tactic designed to silence it. Officers hesitated. That moment of hesitation became momentum, and momentum on a night like this is everything. Then came the flare, a bright red streak slicing the sky open, exploding above helmets and rooftops like the opening shot of a war no one wanted to declare. Horses buckled, shields wavered, the line broke. And when it broke, the crowd surged forward with a force that felt less like a protest and more like history snapping. Metal fencing ripped from the ground. Banners became weapons. 2 police vans ignited near the cenotaph, turning the symbolic heart of national remembrance into a burning warning sign. Whitehall transformed into a combat zone in under 6 minutes. And while the streets erupted, the internet detonated because Number 10 attempted something impossible: to disguise chaos in the age of instant truth. Sanitized footage pushed to broadcasters, calm streets, wide shots, carefully controlled angles. But this isn't the world of curated narratives anymore. Within 3 minutes, raw, shaky, unfiltered phone footage flooded TikTok, X, YouTube, Telegram, platforms where the algorithm favours reality over stability. One clip sealed the government's fate. A police van surrounded, windows shattering, a Molotov arcing through the air before igniting the interior in a fireball. Caption: London has fallen. 50 million views before midnight, and then the blackout. BBC, Sky, ITV all simultaneously collapsing into technical errors. Every viewer knew immediately this wasn't a glitch. This was panic disguised as maintenance. The moment the screen went black, public trust went with it. The unrest metastasised. Birmingham erupted, Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, Liverpool, 5 cities, one rhythm, one message. Authority has limits. And tonight, those limits snapped. This wasn't a protest anymore. It was the moment the country stopped listening. The moment the shields hit the ground in Parliament Square wasn't the end of the crisis. It was a premagtor. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, a power vacuum. And power vacuums do not stay empty for long. As the footage of the surrendering officer spreads across social media, the reaction is immediate and explosive. To some, he's a hero, a symbol of moral resistance. To others, he's a traitor who abandoned the last thin line between order and chaos. Within 15 minutes, the country is sorting itself into factions, not by geography, not by politics, but by instinct. The entire nation fractures into emotional blocks, each convinced they are defending democracy from the other. Inside the crisis room at Downing Street, the air turns electric with fear. Starmer's team watches the shield drop video loop on the central screen. Analysts talk over each other, demanding interpretation, narrative control, countermeasures. But it's too late. The clip has become something more than evidence. It's become myth. A symbol that spreads faster than any government directive can hope to contain. Starmer orders a reinforcer statement drafted demanding unity, discipline and national calm. It is finished, approved and sent to broadcasters, who never air it. Not because they refuse, but because they can't. Their transmission servers crash under a tidal wave of user-uploaded footage. The official message dies before it breathes. By dawn, the crisis evolves into something no intelligence briefing prepared them for: a moral rebellion. Officers from Cardiff, Sheffield, Brighton and Newcastle begin posting anonymous messages online. Some say they understand the frustration. Some say they fear escalation. A few quietly admit they are unwilling to raise a baton against citizens who look like their sons and daughters. Others insist they will follow orders to the end. The division isn't in the streets anymore, it's in the uniforms. At 7:13 a.m, a senior commander delivers the worst update of the night. Prime Minister, we can no longer guarantee unified compliance within law enforcement. There it is. The sentence no leader ever wants to hear. The moment you realise your authority doesn't exist in your voice, it exists in the willingness of others to obey. And that willingness is collapsing. Meanwhile, outside Parliament, the crowd swells to over 10,000. Some chant for reform, some chant for resignation, some chant simply because the air feels charged with history. The atmosphere isn't victory and it isn't rage. It's something harder to define: momentum. A nation that suddenly tastes the possibility of rewriting its relationship with power. Military transports roll toward Westminster. But even that movement triggers a new wave of panic. Has the government lost control? Are troops being deployed against civilians? Footage of soldiers mobilising hits the internet instantly, and the hashtag Marge. Civil breakdown surges past 50 million impressions in under an hour. This is no longer a protest, no longer a riot, no longer even a political crisis. This is the moment every democracy fears, when authority, narrative and public trust all collapse at the same time and the nation steps into the unknown. The clock passes 3:12 a.m. and for the first time in modern British history, the government has no functional chain of command left to lean on. Operation Tempest has technically been activated, but activation means nothing when the forces meant to deploy can't reach the streets they're supposed to secure. Convoys stall at blocked intersections. Armoured carriers idle on routes choked with debris and crowds. Helicopter support is grounded by smoke plumes rising from half a dozen districts. Even elite units radio back the same impossible update: no safe point of entry. Inside the Cobra room, the final blow lands quietly. A single intelligence officer places a tablet on the table. Prime Minister, you need to see this. It's a live feed from Parliament Square. The moment every advisor hoped was a rumour, a glitch, anything but reality, now undeniable. A second officer drops his shield, then a third. Then entire lines loosen, step back, and begin laying down their gear. Not out of rage, not in defiance, but in exhaustion. The one resource the government absolutely required to maintain authority, compliance, is evaporating in real time. Social platforms detonate with the footage. 20 million views in 15 minutes. Captions plaster across every screen. The line has fallen. But the real crisis isn't what the public sees, it's what the government understands. Once an officer lays down his shield, you cannot order him to pick it back up. Not tonight, maybe not ever. Across the country, the pattern repeats. Police step back rather than forward. Commanders hesitate. Tactical units request permission, not to advance, but to retreat. For the first time, the British state isn't fighting the crowd anymore. It's fighting gravity. And then comes the final confirmation of collapse. A military liaison delivers it bluntly. Prime Minister, the troops will not engage civilians without absolute clarity of legal protection. They're refusing deployment until Parliament issues a written directive. Parliament is surrounded. Communications are fractured. The directive cannot be passed, meaning one thing: Britain has run out of levers to pull. On the streets, the crowd senses the shift. The chants change from fury to something far more dangerous: confidence. They push forward not as rioters, but as a population realising that authority is not a permanent structure, it's a contract. And tonight, both sides ripped it in half. As dawn approaches, London's skyline glows orange, not from sunrise, but from smoke. The government statements grow shorter, vaguer, more desperate. Words like containment, temporary disruption, and restoration of order ring hollow. The country knows what it has witnessed, not just unrest, not just anger, but the single most catastrophic failure of public trust in modern British political history, because democracies rarely collapse in one moment. But when they do, it looks exactly like this.